So if you've been with us, you know we are going through Hebrews chapter 11. And today, we are going to talk about the topic of deliverance. What does it mean to be delivered by faith? Now, when I talk about deliverance, there's two aspects of what it means to be delivered. First, it means that you're delivered from something. So if you are in a difficult situation financially, being delivered means that God provides for your financial needs. If you are addicted to a substance, being delivered means that God has broken your addiction away from that substance or whatever it may be. If you are in an abusive relationship, being delivered means being preserved and safe and taken out of that dangerous relationship. And so the first aspect of deliverance is that you are to be taken out of that situation. But the second aspect is that you are to be delivered into something new. It's not enough to just be taken out of something, but you have to be put into a new place. So for example, again, if you are being delivered from substance abuse, it's not enough just to be taken out of that, but you are to be placed in a new community that preserves you, that keeps you accountable, and that makes sure that you don't go back to that old way of living. If you are a slave, then you need to be not just freed from your master, but put into a new type of life where you maintain that freedom. If you are delivered from an abusive relationship, well, you are to be placed into a healthy relationship, and so forth. And so when we talk about being delivered by faith today, specifically when we talk about Israel, what we will see is that they are also following the same paradigm. When God delivered Israel by faith, He delivered them out of something negative into something new. And the God that does that for Israel, in the same way, does that for every single one of us who are followers of Jesus. He didn't just deliver us out of an old life, but He delivered us into a new type of life with Him. So let's look at the first aspect, which is the idea of what we are delivered from. Now, to give you a quick recap of where we are in this story, if you remember the story in Exodus, Moses was born an Israelite. However, he became adopted into Pharaoh's household as the adopted grandson of Pharaoh. What that meant is that he would have been the next in line to be Pharaoh one day, and he had all the privileges, the riches of the royal court of Egypt. And although he grew up in Egypt, though, he knew his true identity. His parents hid him. Pharaoh's daughter needed a wet nurse, and so Moses' sister was able to convince her to hire Moses' biological mom. And so for the first 5 to 7 years of his life, he was taught all the stories about Israel's history. He knew who he was. And so that explains why when he became an adult, although he was the adopted grandson of Pharaoh, he decided to kill one of Pharaoh's soldiers who was beating on an Israelite slave because he sided with Israel over Egypt. Well, this caused a problem because he attacked his grandfather's soldier, which meant that he should have been executed. And so he ran, and for the next 40 years of his life, he served as a shepherd in the wilderness. And for there, he just stayed anonymously. He assumed that his life was done, and that was what was all it was for. However, at the age of 80, God called him back to go back to Egypt to deliver Israel from slavery, just as they've been praying for and crying for many years by this point. Moses was reluctant, but after witnessing God's miraculous power, Moses goes with his brother Aaron as a spokesperson, and they decide to challenge Pharaoh. Now, here's the problem. Pharaoh is ruling the most powerful nation and empire at this time. So Moses and his brother they didn't have enough soldiers to fight against them. They couldn't beat them militarily. They didn't have enough resources to fight against them. Even the Israelites were slaves, so they couldn't really overtake an uprising against their masters. And so the only way they could be taken out of Egypt as slaves and be freed was if Yahweh, God, did it. And so that's what God did. He came in and he attacked every single one of the major gods of Egypt. The first god is Osiris. He is the god of the Nile because the Egyptian worshiped Osiris for providing the Nile River. So what was the first thing he did? He turned it into blood to desecrate it, as if to say, Yahweh saying, I'm God, not Osiris. Then the next one, God attacked the goddess of fertility. And the way the goddess of fertility looked, had a head of a frog. And so in God's sense of humor, He used a bunch of frogs to disrupt their lives and make it miserable for them. Then God attacked the Egyptian god of the earth. And the way He did that was by making the dust turn into lice and begin to attack people's livestock and their bodies. Then God attacked the Egyptian fly god because one of the gods was pictured as a fly. So he used flies to attack every single one of them except for the Israelites. Then God attacked the Egyptian god of livestock by bringing disease, by killing off the Egyptian cattle and livestock. God attacked the Egyptian god of healing by bringing boils to the skins of all the Egyptians. Then God attacked the Egyptian god of the sky by bringing hail from the sky, so it started killing the Egyptians. Then God attacked the Egyptian god of storms by sending down locusts that looked like a storm, and they just came and ate up any harvest that they may have had. God attacked the Egyptian sun god by making it dark on the land of Egypt in the middle of the day, although he provided light for Israel at the same time. Then finally, the final plague and the final knockout punch was that Egypt worshipped Pharaoh as their god. And to show how weak Pharaoh was, Yahweh is going to kill Pharaoh's son, and Pharaoh could do nothing about it. Not only Pharaoh's son, but every single person who didn't have the blood of the lamb on their doorpost, their firstborn son was killed. And so with the 10 plagues, what was God doing on behalf of Moses and the Israelites? He's making the same point. Yahweh is God. You might feel like a slave because you are politically, but you serve the most powerful God in this area. The gods that you hear about in Egypt, they have no power over you. I have power over them. I have power over Egypt's livestock, their economy, and even their pharaoh. There is nothing that can be done without my permission. And so this was to give confidence to Israel that Yahweh is their God. He has the power to do whatever he says. Thus, when he commands them to leave and to escape to Egypt, they can have faith in his word. And so we come now to the story in Exodus chapter 14. And this is where they left Egypt and they are approaching the Red Sea. But I want you to notice how the Israelites are reacting in Exodus chapter 14, verses 10 through 12. When Pharaoh drew near with his army, the people of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians were marching after them, and they feared greatly. And the people of Israel cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, "Is it because there are no graves in Egypt that ye have taken us away to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us in bringing us out of Egypt? Is not this what we said to you in Egypt? Leave us alone, that we may serve the Egyptians? For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness." This is after God has shown the 10 plagues, by the way. This is after God has destroyed every single Egyptian god, and yet Israel still reacted this way. Why? The key word there is fear. Fear makes us say things that deep down we might not even really believe. Does the Israelites really believe it was better in Egypt than to be in the wilderness? If they really believed that, then why did they pray for hundreds of years to be delivered as slaves? Did they really think it was better to be a slave in Egypt than to be freed? Obviously, they know in their heads that's not true, but why are they saying this? Because when you're confronted with the unknown, with the fear of death, you start to become irrational. And you start to blame God for putting you in this situation. Because God actually is rescuing them. And they are getting mad at God for rescuing them. Do you notice that God answered their prayers and they are mad that God answered their prayers? God, can you do this for me? You know, this person in my life, they're not coming to Christ. Can you save them? That person comes to faith, but it's really difficult because you're the one that has the disciples. Like, God, why'd you do this to me? You're the one that asked for this. Israel, you are the one that wanted this. But let's give them a break. I can understand why Israel had a lot of fear. Because on one side, they could hear Pharaoh's soldiers coming. Remember, they had horses and chariots. The ground is vibrating near them, so they get a sense they're approaching, the louder the vibration comes. But they're standing in front of this Red Sea, this large sea that there's no way, there's around 2 million of them, there's no way they're going to get across it. And so from their eyes, they are in an impossible situation. Either they choose to be killed by Pharaoh's soldiers, or they choose to go in and get drowned. Either way is death. That's the calculus that they're doing. That's the way they calculate it from the human perspective. However, the author of Hebrews says that it is at this point in verse 29 of Hebrews 11, he writes, by faith, the people crossed the Red Sea as on dry land, but the Egyptians, when they attempted to do the same, were drowned. How did that happen? Well, Exodus tells us that a strong east wind came. It started to push the sea apart until everyone could see dry land. It wasn't water up to their knees or water up to the chest. It was completely dry land. And so what happened is that they saw that as it parted and they saw dry land in front of them, there was walls of water to the right of them and to the left of them. And this had to be as wide as probably a couple miles wide almost, because you have to account for almost 2 million people with their animals to be able to cross through. Now, here's the part that takes faith. When they go on to this, they would have assumed, probably rightly if you're being logical, this is muddy, wet ground. If I come on with our donkeys and our cattle, we're going to sink in and become what? Sitting ducks to Pharaoh's thing. There's no way we can go across this if it's muddy. By God's miraculous power, what did it say in Hebrews chapter 11? They crossed the Red Sea as on dry land. If you study oceanography, this is impossible if you look at the bottom of the ocean or bottom of the sea. So there's a gap that was about a mile wide to allow 2 million people to cross. And supernaturally, the wind came, brought up the water, so it created walls. And they are walking on this soil as if it's dry land. God hardened it while they were walking on it. This is miraculous because we're going to see soon after, God doesn't do that for the Egyptians. Now, I want to highlight something that the author of Hebrews says here. He says that Israel had faith when they crossed the Red Sea. Now, this should be a little surprising because we just read what was their reaction when they first saw the Red Sea. Oh, why didn't you just let us die in Egypt? Is it because there's not enough land and burial plots? I mean, they're constantly complaining, right? And it said they had a lot of fear. And then after this Red Sea episode, you would think they would have changed. They would have been the model followers of Yahweh. But did they change for 40 years? No. They're constantly complaining. They're constantly questioning God. God, why'd you bring us in this wilderness? It was better because at least we got to eat some meat in Egypt, and now we're eating nothing and we're starving. And God brought manna. God brought the ravens. God brought water. And so for 40 years, this generation of Israelites were not marked by faith, according to the Exodus story. In fact, it got so bad that God judged them, didn't allow any of them to enter the promised land except for 2 people, Joshua and Caleb, as an indictment against their lack of faith to Yahweh. So why is the author of Hebrews saying that this generation of Israelites did have faith when they crossed to the Red Sea? Because wouldn't you object to the author and say, wait a minute, how much faith does it really take to walk across when you already see the results? They didn't walk across when the water was still there. They walked across after God did everything, and all they had to do was take that first step. The evidence was all there. This is why. The reason why this generation still had faith, at least in that episode, wasn't because they took an act of faith when they couldn't see any evidence. They took an act of faith even when they were afraid. Faith doesn't mean the absence of fear. Faith means to obey God even when you are afraid. In fact, later on with the next generation, one of the phrases that comes up with Joshua is to be courageous. Do you guys know what the word courage means? It doesn't mean you don't have fear. If you never fear heights, it doesn't take any courage to look over a building if you don't fear any heights. If you don't fear puppies, it doesn't take courage to hold a puppy. It takes courage to do things you are afraid of. The fear is necessary to be defined as courageous. And so the Israelites here did live by faith because even though they saw everything, even though they complained a lot, they were still willing to step onto that piece of land in front of them that was wet. And then they still had enough faith to act even when they were paralyzed by fear. You see, sometimes faith is just taking that first step when you are paralyzed by fear. And as you take that first step, then you take that next step, you realize, oh, I'm not sinking into the ground. The walls of the water are not coming in. We can do this. God is doing this for us. And then you keep taking those steps until you cross the Red Sea. So Israel's faith was not perfect. They definitely were not models of faith we should emulate, especially in the 40 years in the wilderness. But they did have enough faith to obey God by taking that first step on dry land, even though they were afraid, that Pharaoh was going to kill them or they will sink into the land. That's faith. That's all it takes. That's the faith God honors. Is that even in your greatest moment of fear, you still obey. Even though you're afraid of how it might turn out, if you actually shared your faith with somebody, you still say something. Even though you're afraid of what your next season of life may be for your family financially, you still follow the ways of God. Even though you don't know the diagnosis of your health and it looks like there might be bad news, you still faithfully worship Yahweh. That's faith. That's faith. Even though you might have complained silently on the way to church, God, why am I in this situation? Oh, praise Jesus, right? We might say that's hypocrisy. I would say it could be hypocrisy or it could just be fearful faith. The Israelites were doing that right before they stepped onto it, yet they are in Hebrews chapter 11 as an example of a picture of faith. Now, the reason why I know that Israel crossed by faith is because the Egyptians did the exact same thing, but with very different results. You see, the Egyptian army already saw the sea was separated. They saw with their eyes and assumed that they can figure out with their military strategy how to catch up and get to Israel. They did have years of strategy behind them. So they start to decide they can't catch up to Israel on foot. They have to get on horses and chariots to catch up to them. And so with their prior knowledge and with what they could see, they assumed a certain result will happen. But we know the story. The minute the Egyptians started to cross the Red Sea, it was no longer dry land for them. It was wet, marshy mud, which meant that the horses and the chariots got stuck. They couldn't move. And then by the time Israel finally crossed the Red Sea, then the walls of the water came down. Even to this day, on the bottom of the Red Sea, you could see traces of chariots on the bottom of the sea. So you see, what was the difference? Both Israel and both the Egyptians saw God's miraculous power. But the difference is that Israel took steps into the Red Sea because they trusted God's word enough to take that step, even though they're afraid. Whereas the Egyptian went into the Red Sea based on their prior knowledge, based on their military thinking, based on what they could see. You see, faith is not just based on your experiences and what you can see. It is based on looking at what is in front of you, even with all this fear, and saying, I will still take God at his word, even though my emotions are not there. Even though I don't emotionally fully agree with God and I'm not really certain this is going to work, I'm going to take God at his word and take that first step. And so Israel walked by faith. They walked obeying God even when they were afraid, whereas the Egyptians walked by sight. Let me ask you, how many of you are afraid right now? And I'm not saying you're afraid for your life necessarily, but there's anxiety in your heart. Because you know what anxiety is an indication of? It is the fear of the unknown that creates anxiety in you. And usually what happens when you have anxiety, we think of the 10 things we can do to control that and to change our circumstances so that we won't get anxiety. Well, I just have to do these 10 things so that I can guarantee a certain result. If I come with my horses, if I come really fast, we can get through the Red Sea. What is that based on? Your sight, your experience. You see, when you have fear and anxiety, which we all do, which is why Jesus commanded, do not be anxious, he assumes you are anxious by saying that. Do not be anxious for anything, but in everything, by the peace of God, let the peace of God surpass your understanding and guard your heart in Christ Jesus, our Lord. If you are afraid, it doesn't mean you have to just stay in that fear. You can still act and respond to God even in your fear and watch him guide you along each way. I remember one of my good friends growing up. He wasn't a Christian growing up, and then later in life, when he went off to the military, he became a Christian. His sisters were believers, send him the Bible, send him some books from like Tim Keller and other people, and he became a Christian, but I didn't really keep in contact with him since high school. And out of nowhere, when he was coming back from coming back to base, to the mainland, he messaged me on Facebook, and he said, I noticed that you're a pastor now. I was like, yeah. And this would have been shocking to him. It was shocking to me. We knew how we lived back then. He was like, so I'm assuming you're a Christian then. It's like, yeah, that's usually how it works. You know, sometimes, not every pastor is, but yes, I am one of those Christian pastors, yes. He's like, can we meet up this week? I'm going to be in town for 2 weeks. I'm about to head out to base, but I really need to talk to a Christian. And there's no person in my life of our friends that are Christians except for you. It's like, okay. And so I met up with him. And he talked to me about his testimony. He talked to me how God changed his heart and his mind after he started reading the Bible. But then he talked about all this fear that he had about transitioning to civilian life. And he said, Andrew, I've never been to a church. I grew up in a Catholic environment. That was it. But I've never been to a church. So what do I look for? Like, what kind of church denomination? I mean, when they do sermons, how come it's so much longer than the Catholic Mass? Like, some people are preaching 40 minutes. Like, what do I do? And he had all these questions. And then he kept going on. It's like, I'm really nervous about our high school buddies of ours because I don't know how they will react if I told them I'm a Christian. I don't know how many of you have gone through this, but I guarantee that when you first became a Christian, there probably was some fear with stepping into a new life. You had to have those conversations with old friends saying, I'm not doing that anymore. And they might be confused. What? Why? Maybe some of you had to change your career trajectory knowing that your current trajectory wasn't conducive with your walk with Christ. Maybe some of you had to actually start sharing your faith with the unbelievers in your life, and you're afraid of how they will react, and you might lose some of those relationships. All of us, when we identify with Jesus by faith, when we take that first step, it necessitates things that we have to give up, things we may lose. And that fear is justifiable, but that fear should not stop you from obeying God. That is what we are delivered from. But then we see what we are delivered to. Now, the author skips 40 years because, like I mentioned, this generation was not marked by faith. And so all of them died out except for Joshua and Caleb. And Joshua is the new leader with the new generation of Israelites. And then they are coming into the promised land of Canaan. The only problem was that Jericho was in the way. And I mentioned last time about the story of Rahab. Jericho was a fortress city. It was the city walls that didn't just protect Jericho, but the entire land of Canaan. And so with that, we come to Joshua chapter 2. Now, Moses previously already sent out spies to check on Jericho, and the spies came out saying that the walls were up to heaven and the people were so large it made them look like grasshoppers. And so you can know what was marking the hearts of the people the second time around they're trying to come to Jericho. Fear. Again, the fear is there. And it makes sense because on human terms, there is no chance they have against Jericho. In fact, this was a bigger challenge than the Red Sea. Because they are literally fighting the most fortified, most powerful city that is standing in front of them. This is a defense city. It was purposely made to fight against invaders. And so in Joshua chapter 2, when Joshua sent the 2 spies, they come back and they say, you know what? People are still afraid about what happened 40 years ago, about how Yahweh did the Red Sea and all of that, story. They still know about it. Now Joshua speaks to God, and God speaks to Joshua, and he says, here's your military plan. This is how we're going to overtake the most fortified city at this time. Joshua chapter 6, verses 2 through 7. And the Lord said to Joshua, see, I have given Jericho into your hand and its king and mighty men of valor. You shall march around the city, all the men of war going around the city once. You should do for 6 days. 7 priests shall bear 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark. On the 7th day, you shall march around the city 7 times, and the priests shall blow the trumpets. And when they make a long blast with the ram's horn, when you hear the sound of the trumpet, then all the people shall shout with a great shout, and the wall of the city will fall down flat, and the people will go up, everyone straight before him. So Joshua the son of Nun called the priests and said to them, take up the ark of the covenant, and let 7 priests bear 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark of the Lord. And he said to the people, go forward, march around the city, and let the armed men pass on before the ark of the Lord. Let us be honest. You guys probably heard the story. If you heard this is a military strategy, what would you think? We're not going to shoot a single arrow. We're not going to attack any of the guards on it. We're going to march once. Then the next day, we're going to do it again. Then the next day, we're going to do it again. And on the 7th day, we'll do it 7 times. And then once you shout, I'll bring the walls down. Now, I don't think there was like these physicists and scientists back then, but I'm sure there was these nerdy guys that was saying, my calculation says that's impossible. Shouting doesn't bring down fortified walls. So I don't know what you're talking about, Yahweh. I mean, if I was in that crowd, I would probably be the type of like, you guys do it first, and then let me see, in case, because the guards are up there with their arrows, they could shoot down any time you're marching around, by the way. So this is the plan? Do you think this is a practical plan? But again, as we learned from the last episode, faith is not based on your experiences and your strategies and what you see like the Egyptians thought. Faith is taking God's word and obeying it even when you are afraid. And so that's the ingredient. The secret ingredient in all of this is this. All Israel has to do is obey even though they are afraid. And so what we see in verse 30 of Hebrews chapter 11, by faith the walls of Jericho fell down after they had been encircled for 7 days. And so they followed God's plan. They followed his words, even though they probably felt ridiculous, even though they had a lot of fear, even though I'm sure some of them thought, this is not going to happen. God came through. On the 7th day, doing it 7 times, they yelled, they blew the trumpet, the priests make it a loud shout, and whatever it was, could have been an earthquake, could have been, who knows? Maybe their voices became supersonic. We don't know. But whatever it was, the walls of Jericho fell down, except for one part, as we learned last week, which is where Rahab lived because God was going to preserve her and her family for trusting in him. And so this is what happened. The outer wall crumpled down. It created an on-ramp for Israel to go up that on-ramp, jump over the inner wall, and to come into the city and overtake it. And they killed every person, an animal, and overtook it, except for the one part of the wall where Rahab and his family lived. And so Israel's new life started with an unlikely conquest, an impossible feat. Hundreds of years later in Jewish history, this story continued to echo in history. During the time of Judas Maccabeus, if you don't know, he was a Jewish revolutionary person that tried to fight for independence during the 500 years before the time of Christ. Kind of like the William Wallace, Braveheart, he is that version for Israel. And when they went to battle, it was recorded that whenever the soldiers were afraid, this is what Judas Maccabeus would say to them. Remember what Yahweh did for Joshua and his people, how without battering rams or engines of war, they overthrew Jericho and took the city by the wall of God. Without losing a single life, God saved Israel out of Egypt and got them through the Red Sea. Without losing a single life, God overtook the most fortified city at the time and gave the promised land to Israel. What is the point of these two stories? What these two stories show us is the two different sides of deliverance. God saves us out of something, and in Israel's case, he saves them out of Egypt, but he also saves them and delivers them into the promised land. And whether you're coming out of Egypt and whether you're going into the promised land, there's always going to be challenges along the way. In fact, challenges that your resources will not be able to handle. You know, there's a fallacy that people think that God will not give you more than you can handle. That's actually untrue. God oftentimes gives you more than you can handle so that you are forced to go to him instead of your own strategy. So if there's a God-sized problem in your life, you know what the solution is. It isn't to work harder, try harder, talk to every people and gather, do fundraising. That's not the solution. You know what the solution to a God-sized problem in your life is? A God-sized solution. Only God can solve the problems he allows in your life. And there are times where he allows such difficult things to grow in your life because he wants to humble you to the point where you have so much faith in him, even when you are paralyzed by fear, that you understand there's no other option but to step forward. I tried this route, I'm trying this, all the doors are closing. I have to face that Red Sea, and I have to take that step. We are walking around this wall, doesn't make any sense, but when we look at our inventory, we don't have enough soldiers, we don't have enough arrows, we don't have enough horses. There's no way we can destroy this wall. So the only thing left that we can do is follow God's way. And in both instances, even with fear, Israel persevered. And they had victory over their enemies. You know, when God is delivering you out of your old life to follow him and to follow Jesus, this requires faith over fear. What I'm saying is, I don't expect any of us here to get rid of fear. Fear is a natural reaction to things that are unknown in our lives. Fear is a natural reaction to catastrophes that happen in our life. It would be untrue if you acted like you don't have any fear. Oh, I'm totally fine. God's got this. No, we know that in our head, but I know in your heart, you don't really feel that right now, do you? Because when you're looking at your bank account, as much as you know God can provide manna from heaven, you know if it doesn't happen really soon, I won't even have any bread to eat tomorrow. Or you look at your health diagnosis and you realize unless God comes in with intervention, chemo's not going to be enough. That surgery's not going to do everything. That person in my life coming to faith, I've tried everything. They are so far from God, there's nothing I can do to convince them. What do you do when you have that in your life? What do? You act by faith, even when you're afraid. The phrase that comes up throughout the book of Joshua repeatedly is to be strong and courageous, for the Lord your God is with you. Why would God feel the need to repeat this over and over again to Israel? Because they'd gone through 40 years of fear, 40 years of the unknown. Yes, he got them through the Red Sea, but they didn't know how they were going to eat in the wilderness for 40 years. Yes, he got them through Jericho, but they didn't know how they were going to occupy Canaan. There's still many enemies militarily that would still defeat them. Be strong and courageous, for the Lord your God is with you. Be strong and courageous, for the Lord your God is with you. If he splits the Red Sea in your life, whatever that metaphorical Red Sea is, be strong and courageous, for the Lord your God is with you. If he does not split the Red Sea, be strong and courageous, for the Lord your God is with you. If he brings down the walls of Jericho, be strong and courageous, for the Lord your God is with you. Even if he does not, be strong and courageous, for the Lord your God is with you. If your cancer diagnosis is cleared next week, be strong and courageous, for the Lord your God is with you. And even if you're still fighting a terminal disease and you only have a few months to live, be strong and courageous, for the Lord your God is with you. Even if all of a sudden a magical check appeared out of the sky and now you're provided for your family, be strong and courageous, for the Lord your God is with you. And even when you're down to the last dollar and there's no job prospect in sight, be strong and courageous, for the Lord your God is with you. Be strong and courageous, because courage doesn't mean an absence of fear. It means to act even when you are afraid. The benefit of learning all these stories is, even though we're not physically connected to Israel, well, most of us aren't, we still understand that the God who secures Israel's victory is the same God who secures you. The God of Israel is the God of Hebrews 11, and it's the God of the church. He does not change. And so if God does this for his people, the one thing he tells you to do by faith is this: be strong and courageous. The Lord God is with you. Whatever season you're in right now, whatever is keeping you up at night, maybe you're looking through all the quote-unquote evidence in front of you, and you don't see a way forward. Whether it's things with ministry, family, unbelievers in your life, geopolitical situations that are causing you to be afraid, be strong and courageous. Yahweh is with you. Let's pray.